Thank you for joining us for this week's topic, which is the national debt crisis and the effect on future tax rates. I want to welcome Edward Chu, the Senior Investment Manager with Inception Financial Services, engineer turned financial advisor, and also Brian Walker, the President of the AFI Group, financial advisor and entrepreneur. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having me, Robert. Good to be here.
Thanks, Robert.
We appreciate you joining us and helping us get a better insight to the future of tax rates and what they may look like, which is concerning for anyone who's considering retirement anytime in the near future. Brian, so let's take a look at the history of tax rates and what that may tell us about the future of tax rates.
Yeah, definitely. So in order to understand where we possibly could go as a nation when it relates to tax rates, we have to look at where we've been in the past. And it's quite alarming, and a lot of people don't realize where we've been in the past. If we go back to right after World War II, 1944, 1945, we had the top marginal tax bracket. The highest tax rate we've ever had was 94%. And you could see that right there on the chart. You see those green lines are the various highest marginal tax brackets for year over year. So you can see that during that time, 94% of every dollar you made, or 94 cents, that is, above $200,000 went to the federal government in the form of taxes. So that was kind of an interesting time for people that were making more than $200,000 because they kind of had to figure out, okay, does this make sense or not? Which brings me to someone that we all recognize, Ronald Reagan. So Ronald Reagan back then was making movies, and he would make $100,000 a movie. And it would take him 6 months out of the year to make 2 movies. So he made his $200,000, and he said, it doesn't make sense for me to work any longer because 94 cents of every dollar I make from here on out is going to the federal government. So he took the rest of the year off. So he'd work for 6 months, take 6 months off, and then January 1 the following year, he'd start working again. So Americans figured these things out. We're pretty smart people. And we just do what we feel makes sense for us, especially when it comes to taxes and how much we're going to pay. Now, if we fast forward into the decade of the 70s, our highest marginal tax bracket was 70%. And again, that was for everything you made above and beyond $200,000. Then the same guy that we see on the screen there actually became a president later on. And taxes dropped to roughly about that 35% range during his presidency. But then if we fast forward into 2009, our highest marginal tax bracket was 39%. And then in 2018, we had new tax brackets. And so in 2018, our highest marginal tax bracket went down to 37%. So you can see there's a big difference there throughout the decades, going from as high as 94% all the way down to 37, and for a short period, 35%.
Yeah, and so Ed, let's take a look at the history of deficit spending and how deficit spending plays a role in the future of tax rates.
Sure, Robert. So if we take a look at that last slide where tax rates just keep coming down, we might think, hey, 5 years, 10 years into our future, we could have tax rates as low as 20 to 25%. The problem is the spending that we have and the debt that we have as a nation. So if we look at the amount of spending that we have over time, what we've found is essentially we have not really learned our lesson. We've continued to spend year over year. And what we want to do is we want to look at that spending as a percentage, because as the country grows, if we just take a look at spending, but we don't look at it as a percentage, it doesn't really make that much sense. So what we see is in those 40s, when we have 94% as the highest marginal tax rate, our debt as a percentage was about 120%. And then what we see is it continues to decrease. So essentially, these higher tax rates are helping to pay down and buy down the debt that we have. But what we see is over time, and especially over the last 20 years or so, we've seen that spending increase out of control. And what has happened? The only thing that hasn't really followed suit are taxes. And now it doesn't show on that graph, but we're getting close with the close to $5 trillion that we're going to spend in 2020. We're getting close to that 120%, that 120% debt as it relates to our nation. So if we take a look at the history of our deficit spending, you know, during 2008 and 2009, we knew we had to, I mean, we were in a recession. We had to spend our way out of that recession. But what happened is we didn't learn our lesson. And if we take a look at 2019, our deficit spending, which means the amount that we spent above what was coming in, was going to be $1 trillion again. And we were slated to spend $1 trillion over what we earned this year as well. But with the COVID crisis, now we're looking at 3 to 4 to 5 trillion in spending above what we're bringing in from our taxes. So the CARES Act, yeah, I mean, it was slated for 2.2 trillion, but it's likely going to be somewhere between 4 to 5 trillion. And our debt as it stands is 24 trillion. And the problem is as we keep getting closer and closer to what we call the tipping point or the breaking point of 53 trillion, if we reach that, then unfortunately at existing tax rates, we will only bring in enough to cover the interest on that debt. Much less should interest rates go up in the future and our debt become more expensive.
And let's just not take our word for it. I wanted to take a moment to show a video trailer of the documentary that was created last year, The Power of Zero, The Tax Train is Coming, starring best-selling author David McKnight, also former Comptroller General David Walker, and many other economists, congressmen. Let's take a quick look at the trailer to that documentary series to get a better idea of what the experts are also saying about the future of tax rates. And this is prior to even the spending for the CARES Act and the COVID-19 bailouts.
The truth is the federal government has lost control of the budget.
Instead of paying for all the new initiatives, whether they're tax cuts, spending increases, all sorts of things that we like, the government's just putting it all on the national credit card. And as a result, our national debt is just going up and up and up. And it's growing faster than the economy. And that's when you know you have a real problem.
Everything is going to be squeezed out of the budget. There won't be anything left.
The road we're on is a perilous one that ultimately leads to the bankrupting of our country.
So we have a crisis on our hands.
All Congress has to do for this whole situation to come to a head is nothing. Because every year that they do nothing makes the problem even more unsolvable.
We don't seem to have the ability to get along and find common ground.
Is the government trying to trick you right now? And the answer is very simply yes.
So why is this being swept under the rug? Why is nobody talking about this?
Probably because it's not popular.
So I've actually been traveling around the country for about 4 years now, taking the Power of Zero message to different groups.
When you cut taxes on current generations, you are simultaneously raising them on future generations.
It is all driven by spending. Once we have spent a dollar, we've already decided to tax it. The only question is whether we tax it now or we borrow it now and tax it in the future.
So to make up for the liabilities that we're incurring with all the promises we've made in social insurance programs, we're going to have to increase substantially the tax rate and perhaps even double it.
Now, precisely how high it's going to be,
you know, there's a lot of room to debate, but people will have to pay more taxes.
People's retirement savings are at risk of future higher taxes.
Well, qualified plans really do two things. They defer the tax and the tax calculation. Now let that run past your brain real slow.
I'm driven by trying to help as many people as I can avoid this disaster that's going to come up in retirement when taxes go up and the market goes down. What are these people going to do if they haven't planned ahead of time?
Yes, what will people do? And gentlemen, I appreciate your time today. I know that you have put together a fantastic webinar called Taxes in Retirement, where you teach the strategies that you have both developed to protect families from rising tax rates in the future, especially in retirement. And so we encourage you, if you would like to learn more about this particular topic, subscribe to our channel, and you can click on the link below in the notes and watch the Taxes in Retirement webinar taught by both Edward and Brian Walker. Thank you guys for joining us today. We hope that you'll join us for more of retirement income planning education. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in our next episode.